Hello, welcome back. Now, this is Mr. Long, your science teacher today. Let me help you to revise something on the human reproduction. Now, if you want to try the questions, you can click on the link in the description box below to download the questions to try them. Afterwards, you can also look at the answer key, which I will also provide a link in the description box below. Let's get started. The diagrams below show the female and male human reproductive system. So this will be the female reproductive system. This will be the male reproductive system. Now, basically, for such questions, you need to memorize the parts as well as the functions of the different reproductive system, be it for the female or the male. So for example, look at this part for the female, right? This P part will be known as the ovary. This is a place where the eggs are released, one egg released per month. And the function, but it is to produce the eggs. Now, how about for part R? This is a male reproductive system part, and that is called the testis. Now, it doesn't matter how you spell it, alright, we'll mark it correct. And then the function, this is to produce the sperms. Those are the two different parts and the functions of the male and the female and the male reproductive system. And let's go on. So which of the following statements is true about human reproduction? So during fertilization, the egg leaves the womb. Now, very careful here, we talk about fertilization. Now, fertilization here in terms of human reproduction refers to the fusing of the sperm and the egg. And referring to when I say the sperm, I mean one sperm and the egg. So that's the meaning of fertilization. Now, and the egg leaves the ovary, right? Leaves this part. The womb is this part. So you see the egg leaves the womb. This part is strange. This part is definitely wrong. Wrong understanding. So option 1 is wrong. One egg can be fertilized by more than one sperm. As mentioned earlier, fertilization is a process where one sperm fuses with one egg. So here it says it can be fertilized by more than one sperm. So this is definitely, again, a wrong option. Okay, one sperm only. Fertilization takes place when the sperm and egg fuse. Correct. We talk about this. This is the correct answer. Let's check the last one just to be certain. After fertilization, the fertilized egg attaches itself to the female ovary. No, the fertilized egg will attach itself. This is wrong. Let's make it wrong first, okay? It doesn't attach to the female ovary. Instead, it attaches itself to the linings of the womb. Alright, so the inside of the womb will provide the fertilized egg with the necessary nutrients as it starts to develop into a fetus and eventually into a baby. So answer for this is 3. Plant reproduction. Now we move on from human to plants now. The diagram below shows 4 different flowers, W, X, Y, and Z. Flowers W, X, and Y have some of their parts removed. Okay, let's take a W, X, and Y. So if we know the parts of the flowers, again, this is something like the human reproduction. You got to memorize the parts and their functions. So this will be the petals. This will be the stigma. Alright, so what is missing here? Let's write down, okay? What is missing here is missing anther. So it means that an anther provides the flower with pollen grains. So it's missing anther. So this flower doesn't have its own anther. Now this one, well, it has its anther, stigma, ovary. So what is it missing? It's missing the petals. So it's missing petals. And petals are used by flowers to attract pollinators. And you know that those petals are meant to attract pollinators if the petals are brightly colored, if they are large. Alright, so it's like waving a flag, and trying to get attention. How about this one? This is missing the ovary, the style, and the stigma. So this whole female part here is gone. So missing 3 parts. So missing the female parts. And the female parts here missing are the stigma, style, ovary. Of course, if the ovary is gone, the ovules will also be gone. Right, so this is all the parts that are missing here. So this flower white definitely cannot be fertilized anymore because there's no ovules to be fertilized. So if you talk about fertilization, such question often asks you, if you remove some parts, can the flower be fertilized? So I will say that for this, in this case here, this one can still be fertilized, Because there's still a stigma to catch hold of the pollen grains, there's still a style for the pollen tubes to grow down into it, and there are still ovules inside the ovary for the pollen tube to fuse with the ovules and to kickstart the fertilization process. Again, the important thing about the fertilization is there must be these parts here. Alright, the stigma, the style, and the ovary. This is still here. So this of course can be fertilized. This one is missing this. Right, this is the problem. So here, this can be fertilized. Let's look at the question. So which of these will not, very careful of such word, will not be able to go through fertilization? Now we know the answer is Y. And let's make our claim very clear. Remember, there's no marks for giving claim, usually. So here is flower Y. There's 0 mark. So how do we then get the 1 mark? And explain. As mentioned, right, you can see here through the comparison, it is missing the parts necessary for fertilization. So reason flower Y does not have the female parts like the stigma, style, and ovary. Okay, that's one way you can answer this. Now, another way to answer this, okay, or you can answer it in a different way. So let me just write this down. You can just focus on the ovules portion. So reason flower Y does not have an ovary to be, does not have stigma to receive pollen grains, style for pollen tube to grow, and ovules to fuse with the pollen tubes. This is a longer answer, although it's much more complete. Alright, both, in my opinion here, will get you the 1 mark. Now, flower Y cannot pollinate itself. Explain why. Now, talk about self-pollination, right? This is flower W. Self-pollination means, for example, if there's a bee that flies over, alright, it goes down to the nectar, which is near to the bottom here. Its body will brush against the anther, and the pollen grains will rub on the body. As a bee leaves the flower, the pollen grains can drop and fall onto the stigma, and you have self-fertilization. Since flower W does not have the answer. It does not have pollen grains to fall onto the body of the pollinator. So therefore, there's no pollen grains that can fall onto the stigma. So in this case here, it cannot pollinate itself. Explain why. Let's state our evidence. So we tell the examiner what we know. So flower W does not have answer. Okay, and the usually are more than one. So what does this mean? Let's give the reason now. So there isn't any pollen grains that can fall onto the body of pollinators that can stick onto, or I can say stick onto the body of pollinators to drop onto the stigma. Okay, let's give ourselves half a mark here because there is value in giving the evidence above here. Alright, so flower W cannot pollinate itself. This is flower W because why? Evidence. Let's tell the person you observe this important thing. It does not have anther, but so what? So what it doesn't have anther? So there isn't any pollen grains that can stick onto the body of pollinators to drop onto the stigma. Let's go on to the next question. In the diagram below, draw one arrow to show how pollination occurs between flowers X and Z. Now, so pollination, what's the meaning of pollination? There are PSLE questions in the past that ask you for the meaning, ask students for the meaning of pollination. So it is a process where pollen grain from a flower is transferred to the stigma of another flower or to the same flower of the same species. Alright, that's the meaning of pollination. Let's put it on top here. Okay, it's a process where pollen grains from a flower is transferred to the stigma of another flower or to the same flower of the same species. So it can be from this over to this part, it can be from this over to this, or from this to this part. So very importantly, it's always starting from the answer, because this is where you find the pollen grains. Remember, pollen grains from, let me just be more complete here, from the answer of a flower. Okay, I think this will be more complete. I gave the parts. So let's start off with the correct part. So this part transfer over to this, or it can be from this over to this. So let's see. Flowers, so here we're going to draw arrow. There's one arrow. So you can either draw from, I can't draw arrow with my tool here, so I just use this line to show you. Okay, so it can be from this, like this, from this part to this part. So you can draw like that. Draw an arrow. You need an arrowhead. I can't draw an arrowhead, so sorry about that. Or you can draw another one, which is from, so there are two possible answers. The blue one, this answer here, over to this stigma. Alright, and I also cannot slant my line, so sorry about that. So yeah, that's, you get two possible answers. I'm going to remove the blue one here to avoid some confusion. Okay, now let's go on to the next question. Now the two flowers that has brightly colored petals. Now this will already tell us something. This is going to be insect pollinated, because the purpose of petals is to attract pollinators, right? So this is definitely meant to attract pollinators. And pollinators are things such as butterflies or bees, for example. There could be others, but these are some examples. Right? Even birds can be pollinators, like hummingbirds. Compared to flower tea, now this one has features where you notice the answer. The answer is hanging outside the flower. And this feature or this characteristics, right, tells you this is pollinated by wind. Because it's hanging out. Why? To catch wind. To allow wind to blow its pollen grains away. Alright? That's the meaning of, that's the understanding of these physical characteristics. And look at this stigma. They are like feathery like. So this feathery stigma has a purpose. Right, what's the purpose? Catches pollen grains in the wind or in the air. So what's the method of pollination for plant A and plant B? One of the possible characteristics they have to be pollinated. But very careful here, one common error people make is they confuse seed dispersal with pollination. Why? Because there are things like wind pollinated. So they are confused with, seeds are dispersed by wind. Two totally different ideas here. So A, pollination, let's say here, by animals. See, by insects is also fine. But of course, bear in mind, it's not only insects. That's why the better answer is by animals. So I'm going to remove the not so good answer. Just keep the better answer. And why? Because it has, so we talk about the characteristic, brightly colored petals. It's a characteristic. Now let's read the question carefully to see if we need to explain. State the method of pollination. Okay, done. One possible characteristic that helps them to be pollinated. Okay, that helps them. I'm not very sure if we should, alright, but since it says, how does it help them to be pollinated? Alright, I think in this case, in this question, there's no need for an explanation. Because it didn't say, explain how this characteristic helps them to be pollinated. You just need to state it. However, for the purpose of teaching, I shall explain it here. So I put in brackets, which means it's not necessary for this answer. Attract pollinators. Now here is by wind. And the characteristic will be, you can choose one or two. So as I say, it has an answer that hangs out of the flower. Or you can talk about the feathery like stigma. So you have two possible answers, okay, this or that. And the reasons, well, in bracket, right, I'm not going to retype it, but you can see above. Because I already typed out in the notes above. Let me show you one more time. So the feathery like stigma, if you ask to explain, it catches the pollen grains in the air or in the wind. If you're going to write about answer, you just talk about it's hanging outside the flower to allow wind to blow its pollen grains away. And they only ask for one characteristic, right? Just one. So let's not work too hard and write down both. You don't get extra marks for writing extra things. Let's look at the next question. Florence studied the relationship between wind speed and the distance of seeds dispersed from parent plant. Okay, talk about wind speed and distance of seeds dispersed from parent plant. So this question is about seed dispersal. This particular one is about seed dispersal. If the seeds have structure that allows it to be dispersed by wind, then the logical reasoning is the stronger the wind, the further the seed will travel. So let's see which one, right? Let's look at the white color bar. As the wind speed increases, the distance of the seed dispersed on the parent plant increases from about 5 meters to about, this is like more than 10 meters away. This is about more than 20 meters away. And this one is too far for me to see. This is about what? More than 30 meters away. The stronger the wind speed, the further it goes. That's for plant C. I think therefore plant C should be dispersed by the seeds, right? Seeds dispersed by wind. I think that is my conclusion looking at the graph. As for plant D, you notice that it does not seem to depend on the wind speed very much. Because you see the stronger wind speed here, actually it doesn't disperse that far away. And here the wind speed is the least, yet it's dispersed quite far away from the parent plant. Further even than the wind dispersed. So I'm not quite sure plant D, how the seeds for plant D are dispersed, but I do know it's not by wind. Right, so which one is by wind? I can see here we have wing-like structures, and they are meant to help the seed glide or float in the wind. So this would seem to be hooks. So the hooks hook onto the body coverings of animals. So these are hooks, these are wing. Very careful, don't spell it as wing like. Okay, this is a very common spelling error, so please be very careful, don't spell it wrongly, okay? It's not wing like, it's wing like. There's a G here, G. So which plant, C or D, above here, plant C or D, is fruit Q most likely from? So the confusing part for some of you could be, so many letters. There's P, there's Q, there's C, there's D. Just make sure you match them properly. So Q here, ask for fruit Q, right? Q. This one is wing-like structure. Wing-like structure dispersed by wind. So it should be here. This is for plant Q. So the answer is, the claim will be for plant C. Let's get the answer out first, the claim. So plant C. But as mentioned, is 0 mark. No marks for giving the claim. So where are the 2 marks from? Definitely here the 2 marks will come from your evidence, 1 mark from evidence, and 1 mark from the claim, from the reason. Now what will be the evidence? There are 2 pieces of evidences here. One would be the structure of the fruit, another will be the graph. So let's write down the evidences. Fruit Q has wing-like structures that allow it to float far away from the parent plant in the wind. So that is the evidence. Now let's look at the reason. So how do we know this comes from fruit C? And the graph shows that the stronger the wind speed, let's take a look, see? Wind speed, right? Stronger or larger the wind speed, the further, see? The further seeds are dispersed from parent plant. The further the seeds are dispersed from the parent plant. And that is how you know that is the answer. So this will be 1 mark, and this part is also 1 mark. Let's do a quick recap now. So to answer this, the format is give the claim, but claim is not worth any marks, right? But it is important. Once you have the wrong claim, the teachers will not read the rest of the answers anymore because it doesn't make sense anymore. And then you talk about fruit queue. So evidence comes from two things, right? Fruit queue is here. Wing-like structures that float away, far away from the parent plant. So what if it can float away? How do I know fruit queue comes from plant C? Now I must match these two pieces of information together and say here you see for plant C, the stronger the wind speed, the further it floats away from the parent plant. Now, the next question, fruit P is not a juicy fruit. Explain how the dispersal of the seeds of fruit P is different from that of apple seed. So fruit P is here. It's dispersed by animal. Now here we notice the description, juicy fruit. Now apple, of course, we've all eaten apples before, I'm going to assume, right? All of you are apple eaters. And apple, of course, is a juicy fruit. Juicy and sweet flesh of apples allow it to be dispersed by animals eating the fruit and spitting the seeds out in a random manner all over the place. This is how animals will disperse the seed of apple. Because unless they swallow it, which is also possible, but if they not, they can just spit it out. And since animals don't follow a fixed route, right? They may have a home, but when they gather fruits and they find fruits, they just go all over the place. And they'll eat all over the place and they'll spit the seed out all over the place. Now, fruit P is not juicy, but it's still dispersed by animal because it has hooks. So for such questions, the evidences from the pictures are very important. How is seeds of fruit P different? So different means I must show a comparison. So we must talk both about seeds of fruit P as well as the fruit, apple fruit. So fruit P is dispersed. Fruit P has hooks to hook onto the body coverings of animals which will carry the seeds far away from the parent plant before they fall onto the ground. Right, that's how fruit P, which is the one here, disperses its seeds that are inside the fruit. Now let's talk about the difference now. So we now talk about fruit above. So I'll be using this one here. Okay, I'm not going to retype. So here the apple fruit has juicy and sweet flesh. So this will be the second part of the answer. The first part, for this kind of question, you need to show comparison to get your marks. So it's not, you cannot just write about fruit P and don't write about apple. You will not get anybody, get 0, okay? So apple fruit has juicy and sweet flesh that allows it to be dispersed by animals eating the fruit and spitting the seeds out in a random manner all over the place. So these are the two different ways which the two different fruits disperse their seeds by animals. The diagram shows the pod of a plant containing part X. When you see the word pod, okay, it's important. It tells you straight away it is usually by explosive action, or you can say it's by splitting. Now, so a common misspelling here will be to spell it as spitting. Now, spitting is like you spit something like pui, you know, spit something else. So it's not about spitting here, okay? It's splitting. So choose either one of these to phrases or words to talk about the dispersal method for seeds inside a pot. So dispersed by wind, wrong. Grow, okay, so I know it's not by wind. So let's see. X refers to the seeds, right? So this will be the seeds. So let's identify the parts. So seeds grow into a new plant. That is possible, definitely, right? New plants grow from seeds. X can grow from the stigma of the plant. No. Seeds come from ovules, remember? So fertilize ovules become seeds. It's not from stigma. So stigma part is wrong. Only pollination needs to take place for eggs to be produced. Wrong. Two processes are needed. Firstly, you need to, let's mark it wrong first. The only is a wrong word here because there are two processes. You need to have pollination happening first and fertilization next before you can have your fruit and seeds. Both must happen. Now we're coming to the end, hanging there. Study the diagram below. So you have this life cycle. Seeds germinate into young plant grow into adult. Adult will then have flowers, assuming it's a flowering plant, have flowers that will be pollinated and fertilized, and you have your fruits eventually disperse them. So Y here would be your germination, and X will be your pollination. X here will be your pollination, fertilization, dispersal. So let's go to Y first. Y will be germination. So these two options are correct. X here, there's three things happening, right? You must first pollinate, then fertilize, then you can disperse the seeds. So here, the correct answer is number 4. So it's not only by dispersal, because not all adult plants have fruits like straight away. They must have flowers first, and the flowers need to be pollinated, and then the pollinated flowers have to be fertilized before they can be dispersed. Now, sometimes for a seed dispersal question, you have a map given to you. For such questions, it's important to understand the key, alright, which is here. So you must, this one looks complicated. There are many parts. So be very careful. If you have a color, you have colored pens, or you have a highlighter, you use those to help yourself mark out certain things. So we know that A, alright, and we must look at firstly the parent plant. So very important. Let's find the parent plant, the position of the parent plant. A's parent plant is this. B's parent plant, I'm going to use a different color now. B is here. And C's parent plant, again a different color. C's parent plant is here. The idea of highlighting them is to find out how are they dispersed. Now let's look at C first. Triangle is here, triangle here, triangle, 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 triangle. C's plant are all along the coastline. This tells me that plant C, alright, is dispersed by water. Okay, that's for plant C. Let's look at plant B now, the one in blue. Okay. Where are those in blue? They are inland. Alright. Oh, I see an important thing called wind direction. This is also important. If this is a parent plant, if the wind blows this way, notice that the seeds here all disperse in the same direction as the wind. There's no young plants of plant B on the left hand side or the right hand side of plant B. This tells me, because of the wind direction here, that plant B is dispersed by wind. Let's look at plant A now. Alright, and that is in red. So A here, you get it from disperse, seems to be like behind it, in front of it, far away from it, so it's all over the place. It doesn't have to be in the direction of the wind, it can also be here, against the direction of the wind. Most likely, and it's far away from the parent plant. So it's not by explosive action. So this tells me this is dispersed by animals, randomly all over the place, far from the parent plant. So now we have this. So by water here, clearly the fibrous husk here traps air to let it float on water. So P is dispersed by water. That tells me parent plant C will give us the fruit P. Sweet and juicy flesh, we talked about it earlier on, right? Sweet and juicy flesh dispersed by animals. So this is by animals. So this is fruit Q. So I know fruit Q, animals is fruit Q. This is how Mr. Long will do such question. Understand the map, mark out which of these are dispersed by the different dispersal methods, and map it to the characteristics of the given fruits. Feathery structures, of course, is to allow it to float far away from the parent plant in the wind or in the air. So this is, so fruit R is by wind. By wind here will be your fruit R. I think we can almost solve this. So which correctly matches the fruits to the plants? P, we know P is C. Let's check. There are two options here. Q, we know it is A. That's it, we got the answer. Alright, answer here is 3. So let's be very certain. So let's double check with R. R is at B. Yeah, that's correct too. Alright, that's it for today. Good job on hanging in there all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and if you like this video, do encourage me by giving me a like. Also, if you have other videos that you'd like me to do, type in the comments below and give me some ideas so I can prepare them for you. Take care. Goodbye.